So a lot of you have been on that journey, and I don't know about you, but sometimes I get in the habit as I'm reading this, and as much as I've read the Bible over the years, you'd think I'd know better. As much as I was trained in seminary, you definitely think I would know better, but we get in the habit of reading, and we read about Adam and Eve, we read about Noah, we read about Abraham, we read about Isaac, we read about, this week we've been reading about Jacob and Esau, and sometimes I think we get into the mindset of reading about them. It's their story. And we're learning more about God, and we're learning about how faithful they were. But the challenge is that their story is our story. I mean, these are those who have gone before us. And as much as we might look back to Adam and Eve and want to blame them and say, you know, if they hadn't picked the fruit off the tree and eaten it, we'd all be fine, right? Because if they hadn't done that, certainly we would have stayed on the straight and narrow and never sinned. No, we've got this same inclination, this same thing in which Satan could have whispered into our ear at any time, and he still does to this day. Tries to get us to take control and do it ourselves, do it our way, make our own choices, and leave God out of it. The same temptation that caught Adam and Eve is the same temptation that catches us. It's the same temptation that caught Cain and Abel, or the people in Noah's generation, or even Abraham before he had his encounter with God, where Abraham worshiped a whole ton of different gods that were made up by humans. And so as we read this story, this is our story. This is our history. And it talks about the same battles that we struggle with. And so as we walk to this week, we looked at the separation between Esau and Jacob last week. We looked at how a birthright was taken. A birthright was technically surrendered, just willingly given so somebody could have a pot of stew. But then it was kind of manipulated for it to ultimately be received by Jacob. And we see the division and the pain and the chaos that it caused in the family, but more so between two brothers, such that Jacob went away and he had to live in another land. Can you imagine two brothers so divided that they couldn't even live in the same community? And yet, that's not a unique story, is it? I remember one time that I had a family that they weren't part of the church, but they called me up and they said, hey, will you do the funeral for our father? And I did, and as I met with them, I found out I was only meeting with 4 of the 7, and the others wouldn't even be in the same room. And when it came to the funeral, I had to do the service twice. No, that's extreme, but it happens out there. We see division in families. We see division that is so intense, that is so painful, that is so... We know it happens. We see division in our world in the presence of divorce, and we see how that brings forth great pain. We see division as siblings divide. We see division as, all you have to do is turn on a talk show, and at some point there's going to be some kid on there talking about their parent and how horrible they are and how... This happens. It may not be the normal story, but it is a story that in some way touches our life somewhere, either through our own family or through friendships or through neighbors, or we see the division and the pain and the struggle and the suffering. And even if it doesn't happen on this grand level, sometimes it happens on a more minor level, or we might call it minor. Back here about 5.5 years ago, as we were in the middle of the pandemic. This church was in the middle of a merger and was looking down the lens of separating from our previous denomination because they were turning away from the Word. And I got to lead during that time, and I thought, I'm fine, I'm doing great, except for what I didn't see was the damage that it was doing to me, the pressure that it was putting into my life, and even to the point where it ebbed me on the borders of depression. And it was affecting my relationship with my oldest son. And one day, in the midst of my pain and what I was enduring, I lashed out at him in a way that was totally unfair, a way that wounded him deeply, in a way that changed our relationship in what seemed like forever. We were still father and son. He'd still come over to the house. We'd do almost like the thing of this is what a father and son should do, but it had lost its closeness. It had lost the depth of the relationship that was once there. And the longer it went on, it tore me open. And I couldn't couldn't figure out how to fix it. I tried so many different things, and I just couldn't repair it. It didn't matter what I said. It didn't matter what I did. I had all my ideas in my head about what I could do to repair this relationship. And one morning, I was in this sanctuary. It was a Thursday morning in the fall, and I'm walking this sanctuary, and I'm praying and talking to God about life, and the relationship with my son just kind of hit front and center in my head and in my heart. And I really, as I walked, I was just recognizing the pain was even deeper than what I'd acknowledged. The separation, the woundedness in both of us. And I'm like, God, I don't know what to do. I've asked you to change his heart and help him to forgive me. And I didn't pray that way. I said, God, I need this relationship. I want it restored. And I'm desperate and I don't know what to do. And I'm just crying to you, just like, I want this. And I finished that prayer time, and I really didn't think anything more of it throughout the rest of that day. That evening, I was on the way to a men's group, and I tried to call one of my other kids, and he was busy. And then it was just this idea to call Eric. And I called him and, asked him if he had a moment. And he goes, I'm getting ready to go into a movie, but I've got a couple minutes. And I told him, I said, Eric, I said, I can't go back and undo what I did. But I want a relationship with you. I want a good relationship with you, and I will do anything to rebuild this. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it looks like, but I want more than what we have. And he said, okay. And then we hung up. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it was just, okay, and it's going to continue on. The next day he called me. And for an hour and a half, we had a conversation as though nothing had ever happened, only something very significant had happened. And I would say the relationship was better than it had ever been, closer than it had ever been even before the offense. It changed when I called out to God in a desperate plea, and instead of asking God to change Eric, I was really pleading that God would change me, that God would transform the relationship. God gifted me with something that showed me that God can restore anything, no matter how broken. And so as I read this story of Jacob and Esau, I see a story of a brother who, in essence, betrayed what it meant to be a brother. I see division that's so great that one brother goes and he lives in another country, and for 2 decades, the family's separated like this. And I can only imagine the pain in both Jacob and Esau's heart as these boys were raised together, and it seemed like they had this deep relationship, and one day it all changed. And as I think of my story, and I think of their story, and I think of the stories that I've encountered as a pastor over the years, it makes me begin to wonder about your stories, about the brokenness in some of your relationships, ones in which maybe you, like I, were ready to just give up because you just couldn't see it ever changing because it had stayed that same way for so long, and you tried so many ways. I want to invite us to get into Genesis 32. Let's dig into this story of the time when Jacob was called by God to return to his homeland where his brother still lived. Jacob sent messengers ahead of himself to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau." Did you hear that? Now Jacob, if you don't remember from last week, Jacob was the one the covenant was going to walk through Jacob. He was going to be the Lord. He was going to be the greater one, and Esau would be the lesser. It said Esau would actually serve Jacob. But look how he's addressing him. This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats and male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my lord that I may find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are coming with him. How are you feeling right now? I mean, you're going, and he wasn't gloating about all these animals. He's saying, God has blessed me. I'm coming to you with all this. And the response back is like, yeah, Esau's on his way, and it's not with a handful of people to keep him protected. He's coming with 400. I'm a little anxious in the relationship at where it's going from here. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Hear how Jacob's thinking. He's sitting there, he's like, I got to solve this problem. I got to make sure my family continues on in some way. And so if they attack me and they attack this half of the family and we all lose our lives in this attack, he's assuming these 400 are soldiers that are there. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but he's going to divide the family. He's going to solve the problem to make sure his family line goes on. Because after all, he's the line through which God's covenant is going to roll. He's going to make sure that that's going to survive. And then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and the faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid that he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. Jacob is appealing to God, even though he's meddled a little bit. He's like, I'm going to divide my people and I'm going to send all these flocks to bribe Esau and kind of lower his anger. He's now falling on God in prayer. And do you hear the desperation in his voice? He's basically saying, I've done my thing, but my thing isn't going to cut it. I'm coming to you, God, and I'm just laying everything before you. But then he reminds God of something. He says, God, you made a covenant with me. You said that I would be blessed, that the promise would be carried through me. I sometimes wonder if he was reminding God or if he was reminding himself. He said, this is what you promised me. And instead of manipulating for it like I did before when I got Esau to sell his birthright for a pot of stew, or I went to my father and I agreed with my mother and I sat there and I dressed up like Esau and I lied and deceived my father so that I could receive the blessing, so that I could get the double portion of the inheritance and so that I would be the covenant line. You see, God's plan was that Jacob would be the covenant line. He told that to his mother. Jacob grew up knowing that promise was his, but he manipulated it. And we read through that last week. We dealt with that where he manipulated in order to get. He manipulated his father because I got to make sure that I get what God said I was going to get. I got to make sure I'm the covenant line. He didn't step back and wait for God to provide. But here we see a different Jacob that's been shaped over the last 20 years. Here he's coming back to Esau, and when he finds out Esau is coming with 400 men, he doesn't turn around, does he? Now he divides the crew. So his human anxiety, that fear, it gets him to act differently. But then in this desperation, he falls before God. And he says, God, you said that I'm the covenant line. You promised to protect me. You promised to provide for me. God, I'm laying it all in your hands. Do we do that with broken relationships? Do we lay it all in God's hands? Or are we still praying prayers in which we want God to change the other person? So I think when we lay it all in God's hands, when we come to that moment of desperation, we might call it that last-ditch effort, that Hail Mary, You wouldn't think we do that in our faith life, but sometimes we do. We have exhausted every method, every practice, every approach by our own strength, and every single one has failed. And finally, we come before God in desperation and say, God, whatever you can do. We finally surrender. We finally lay down our way. We stop trying to solve it on our own, and we stop praying that God would do what we think God should do. And we come before God and we just say, God, bring the transformation. And in that we become humble, we become vulnerable, we become open to what God is doing. I think of some of the comments about relationships that I have had where there's some brokenness that has occurred, and I think of the phrases that I've used. I didn't really mean it. I was just kidding. You can't stay mad at me forever. Everybody makes mistakes. What did I really do that was so terrible, that was like more than what most people do? Can't you just forgive me? It's not like you've never wronged me in some way. Think about all the human phrases that we use to do what? To rationalize our position so that we can, to some degree, hold where we are and make the other person change. I tremble to think how many comments I said to my son that were like that, in which I almost blamed him for not fixing the relationship on the basis of the offense that I committed. God brings a transformation into our lives. When we come to that point of humbleness, that point of brokenness, where in desperation we rely on Him and Him alone. I don't think Jacob knew entirely what he was getting into. I got to believe that even when he called out on God, that in the back of his mind, in the midst of that desperation, there's still this little thing of, I don't know how this situation's going to turn out. But that surrender to say, whatever I do, whatever I accomplish by my hand, I know that's not going to succeed. Right on the heels of this, right on the heels of this prayer, something happens in Jacob's life. And so I want to take us to that. It's later in chapter 32. Jacob looked up. Wait, no, hold on. Are we missing the other one? Oh, I didn't give it. Fortunately, I got this great book that when I forget to put it up on the screen, it is always here. All right, we're going to get into chapter 32, verses 22 to 32. So that night Jacob got up, and he took his 2 wives, his female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the fjord at Jabbok. And after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. And so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. And when the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Can you imagine the pain? You get your hip dislocated in a wrestling match. What do? You're done, right? You just lay it down. The man said to him, "Let go of me, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let go of you unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he blessed him. And so Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. And therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. We hear this image in which he has some sense that he is wrestling with one who either is God, most likely he thought was one who was sent by God. But we ultimately find he was wrestling with God himself. And Jacob sits there and he gets in this place where his hip is dislocated and it's no longer winning the match. Now it's clinging on and saying, I am not letting go of you, God. I'm not letting go until you bless me. He knew he had the blessing of the covenant line, but he sought something more. He sought that God would be with him, and so he held on. And we look at Jacob's life, and it becomes the story of all of Israel. We hear this name change that he is given. This becomes the story of Israel's wrestling with God. Wrestling with God because of what? Because they try to live faithfully, and if you read the rest of the Old Testament, you get past Genesis, and it looks like a roller coaster. God says, these will be my people. And these people are really faithful and following God with all they got. And then they're like, they get to points so low where they're like, who? God, who? Like they have no idea. They're not worshiping, and they're worshiping all these foreign gods. They're doing all these evil things. God calls another one to call them back, and they come back to faithfulness. They stay there for a while, maybe a generation or 2 generations, and boom, right back down. This roller coaster of faith in which they rebel against God. And in rebelling against God, they turn against each other in all of the evil that goes on. To sit there and look at this wrestling with God, Jacob's life says that this is going to be our story. This is going to be our story because sin has entered the world, and sin is constantly crouching at our door, tempting us, calling us, baiting us to lean into its ways. And guess what we do with our flesh? Guess what we do with our human mind? We sit there and we fall prey to it. But God doesn't give up any more than God gave up on Jacob. When Jacob finally fell to that point where he turned and he pleaded with God, he said, God, bring restoration. Bring me a future where right now it looks like only division and destruction. And God brings it. God brings it into Jacob's life. And God brings it into our lives. We have a God who is built in which his love and his redemption is poured out into our lives. If it wasn't, we would be dead at our first sin. Our first division in relationship with each other or with God, and that would be it. There would be no hope. But through Jacob's wrestling, we see this witness that there is always hope when we lean into God and we begin to wrestle with God. And when we wrestle with God, God changes our heart and changes our minds and changes the way that we approach the brokenness in our world, the brokenness in our relationships. We approach it in utter dependence and in humility, such that God may change us. Do you want to hear the end of this story? Chapter 33. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. And so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two... Wait a second. We're repeating here. We aren't? Oh, no, you're right. Okay. He put the female servants and the children in front. What a guy. Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him, and he threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. And Esau looked up, and he saw the women and the children. Who are these with you? He asked. And Jacob answered, they are the children God has graciously given your servant. And then the female servants and the children approached, and they bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. And last of all, Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. And Esau asked, what's the meaning of all these flocks and herds that I met? It was to find favor in your eyes, my lord, he said. But Esau said, I already have plenty, brother. Keep what you have for yourself. No, please, Jacob said. If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. This parallels what Jacob experienced in his night of wrestling. He wrestled with God. And in this wrestling with his brother and his continuing to move forward, not turning back, he finds a restoration. He looks on Esau and he says, this is like seeing the face of God. Something has been restored to me that I thought I'd come to the point where I just decided in my life there was no way the healing could ever occur. But seeing you is like seeing the face of God now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me in all I have and all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. God restored that which could not be restored. God returned that which I would imagine both brothers thought was irredeemable. What is it in your life that you see as irredeemable, as impossible to be healed? Are you willing to give up on that relationship for good? Are you so addicted to being right and making them wrong that you won't surrender and allow God to change you? Are you unwilling to wrestle with God because of what that might mean? When I started this sermon, I did not have the story about my son. But God convicted me that it's not a story to keep to myself. It's just as the story of Jacob and Esau is your story, my story is your story, and your story is my story. We strengthen each other as we witness to what God has done and is doing in our lives. We need to be reminded that we have a God who is faithful, a God who redeems things that are shattered, broken. And I think you need to know that the one who's speaking the message didn't get a little card when he graduated from seminary that said, you don't have these problems anymore. I grew up with some preachers where I call them the bow to the robe and kiss the ring preachers. They portrayed that they always had it right, that they didn't have the problems. And I found I couldn't relate to them. We're all in this. We all have the same challenge. The only reason I'm here speaking the word is it happens to be the spiritual gift God has given me. God has given each of you spiritual gifts for the betterment of his kingdom. And yours is not less than mine or more than mine. It's the gift God's chosen to give each of us. And it's meant, we're all given these gifts, it says in Scripture, so that we may edify the body. We literally may edify the presence of Christ in one another. I pray that whatever your gift is, and if you don't know, that you will pray and seek it out. You can come talk to me too, I can help you. But your gift is not something where God says, cool, you got a gift, keep it for yourself, and you can use it only when you want to use it for your benefit. It's meant for the community. And if it's held back from the community, then the community is not whole. We help each other to grow. I remember in seminary they described our Christian walk as being like a ladder. Like you're taking these steps of faith and we're trying to get everybody up to that. I think that's a lie. I think Christianity is a little bit more like a circle, in which every one of us is somewhere on that circle with different areas of our lives. And so we come to this new awareness that God is more, that God desires to bring transformation or new life, and we begin to live into that, and then Satan throws up a few roadblocks to get us to doubt. And it's people who God calls alongside of us to encourage us and remind us and walk with us that get us to step over Satan's tripwires and continue on that path. And we begin to live into the early elements of it, and sometimes that's a little scary, a little bit like what Jacob encountered when he's like, okay, I'm going to take the bold step. I'm going to go out. I'm going to make all these plans. I'm going to send all these herds. And then you hear that 400 soldiers are coming with your brother. Satan throws another tripwire out here. He tries to discourage us again, to distract us, to confuse us. And God sends people in, people who have walked that path in that particular area of life before, to encourage us and bless us and teach us that God is faithful. And then we come and we live it into the fullness until it becomes the full of reality in our lives. The thing is that the circle that I'm growing on is different than the one you're growing on. Maybe I've already been through the one that you're growing on, and so I can be that encourager. But equally, the one that I'm growing on, you become my encourager because you've walked through it. We're all at different places in our life, and so there's nobody that's like up on a rung of a ladder saying that, oh, you know, I'm up on level 7 and I want to help you get up here. The reason why I don't think that works is because most of us don't feel like we belong on the level that we're on, because we know the truth about ourselves. We know the things about ourselves that we keep from other people. We know our sin. We know our lack of faithfulness. We know. And so we're up on step 4, and when the person on step 3 is like, can you help me get up here? And we're like, no, because if you get up here, you're going to find out I really don't belong here. It's a game. But as we walk in this circle and we see ourselves that God has gifted us to pour into each other's lives, then it becomes that we are just here to bless one another and help each other on the journey. And it's not about somebody attaining some level where we get ahead of everybody else. We're here as a family. We're here and we love each other. We care for each other. And we want to see each other thrive and grow. And the more I help you to grow, the more you can help me to grow. That's the design. I have loved, as I've served in ministry in so many different capacities, that I've always been amazed that sometimes the newest believer, God brings into my life and they pour some amazing gift into me that helps me to grasp God in a new way or in a deeper understanding. And I'm like, God, you truly are amazing. Somebody who just came to know you and you use them to bless me. That's his design. God is good. Gracious Lord and God, we thank you. I thank you for Jacob and for Esau and for their story. Lord, it fills us with hope at the transformation and the new life that you can bring in the most broken of places. God, I pray for my brothers and sisters here this morning. Lord, as we think about this story, as we dwell on who you are and the brokenness that you can restore, and the Lord, some of us have a relationship on our mind right now. A situation of brokenness, Lord, maybe we're involved in it. Or maybe we see it between two others that we care so deeply about. Lord, if we're in it, I pray you would humble us. Humble each of us and teach us. Help us that we may become so dependent on you, so confident in the healing that you provide. With all that we are, we throw ourselves before your throne of grace. And Lord, if it is between others that we love, that we care about, Lord, I ask you to make us the mentor. Teach us how to come alongside. Not throwing our stuff in to solve the problem, but Lord, praying over them that they may come to that place of leaning wholly into you. Lord, we love you. We pray this all in the power of your holy name. Amen. Church, let us rise up. Let us give praise and glory to our God.